Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our panel on the many lives of James Bond. I'm your moderator, Alan Porter, and today we're going to be talking about a different Bond than the ones we normally talk about. So I think we're all familiar with Bond from the screen. I mean, we've had 24, maybe 25 movies over the last 6 decades. Don't know if we'll ever get to see the 25th, but here's hoping. We're also probably familiar with Bond from the novels, the original ones from Ian Fleming and the continuation novels by various writers. But what we're going to talk about today is Bond outside of the screen and page, or outside the prose page. Anyway, we're going to talk about all the different iterations of James Bond. Very pleased to welcome Clinton, Jared, and Mark to the panel, and let them go down and each introduce yourselves, talk about a bit of your Bond bona fides, and then we'll start diving into sort of some of the different aspects of James Bond that we've seen over the years outside of the screen and page. So Clinton, do you want to lead us off, give a bit of an intro?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Like Alan said, my name is Clinton Rawls, and what I do, I'm the webmaster of a website called comicsroyale.com. It's a labor of love for me. What I do primarily is I find a lot of foreign language James Bond comic books. Many of them are unofficial, illegally made, counterfeit productions, and they've never been in English before. So what I do, it takes time, but I translate them into English and put them online for fans to have new stories. As far as a Bond bona fide, the joke I often make is that it was written in the stars for me to love Bond because the year I was born, you had Roger Moore, Sean Connery, and George Lazenby all playing Bond in some degree. So that's my bona fide.
I'm just going to actually jump in there. I think somebody's actually trying to prove it. I think it's Bill who's going to be on our next panel, that they were actually all, there's one day in the year when all three of them were actually playing Bond on the same day. I think he's got 2 out of the 3. He's just trying to prove the 3rd.
Wow. That's amazing.
All right. Jared?
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Jared Albrick, known as the Yard Sale Artist. I'm a comic book creator, artist, and writer. But in all my spare time, I like to talk about James Bond. I'm a producer and host of podcasts over on the On Her Majesty's Secret Podcast Network. I do the Rogue Agents podcast with my idiot friends, and I also do the 6 of the best music of James Bond with my best friend Alan J. Porter, who's on the panel here today. So, yep, I'm all the time talking about Bond. The only other bona fides I've got is I've got this weird birthmark I was born with. Okay, it's a tattoo actually, yeah. But no, I love Bond, love talking Bond, and I'm happy to be here.
And Mark?
I guess it's my turn.
Yeah.
My name is Mark Edlitz. I'm thrilled to be on this panel with this group of people whose work I admire. I worked as a writer, producer for ABC News, NBC, Lifetime. I wrote a book called How to Be a Superhero. And I also wrote a book which mirrors the title of this panel, called The Many Lives of James Bond. Hey, you got one
too. It's in stereo.
And that book is 2 things. One, it's sort of an examination of the character of Bond in video games, films, novels, video games, comic books, comic strips, and radio dramas, and just interviews with the filmmakers who made those. And it's also the largest collection of interviews with actors who played James Bond, but in different media. So while there's some interviews with film Bonds, there's also, radio Bonds, video game Bonds, I think 4, cartoon Bond, James Bond Jr. And I'm told that I might have a book coming out in November, but right now I'm happy to talk about the many lives of James Bond as it relates to this panel.
Cool. Thank you, Mark. Yes, and I will totally own up to the fact that I did crib the title for this panel from your book. So it was the inspiration for this panel. So, I'm Alan Porter. I'm the moderator for this panel. I'm the author of James Bond, The History of the Illustrated 007. Oh, perfectly on cue.
I have it right here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was not rehearsed, by the way. Thank you very much.
It's a lot less shameless if I do it for you.
Thank you. And as Jared mentioned, I co-host on A Majesty's Secret Podcast, the 6 of the best James Bond music show, and also co-host on movie reviews. But we've done all 24 movies plus a couple of the unofficial ones now. So we're actually just currently going through doing career retrospectives for each of the Bond actors, and we've just recorded the Sean Connery one, so that should be up relatively soon. And I think Jared and I, you and I have a podcast coming up on Tomorrow Never Dies. Yep.
Correct. The music of.
Yep. So look out for more of that. So as I said, I blatantly stole this idea for this panel from Mark. So I'm actually going to start off with Mark, and I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball here.
Uh-oh.
Because I went back, because I know I said I wanted you to talk about the radio bond, which I
no.
think we were. But
I've got all this preparation.
No, we'll come back to that.
Preparing.
We'll come back to that. But I actually, I was re-looking at the title, and I actually noticed that in the title summary in the abstract, we talked about the dancing bond, and I will say it is one of my absolute favorite stories in your book. So could you tell us the story of the dancing James Bond, please?
Yes. There is a dancing 007. When the Oscars happened in 1982 March, they did a tribute to Albert Broccoli, and part of that tribute also coincided with For Your Eyes Only being nominated for Best Song. So they had Sheena Easton come, and what happened was roughly 4 minutes and 20 seconds of just the most glorious, over-the-top Bond experience you could ever hope to see. It was sort of like a Las Vegas production. And so here's what happened. They had cast an actor/dancer named Blair Farrington to play James Bond. And he got injured just a day or two before the production happened. So they got this other actor who was in the sort of the chorus, and they pointed to him and said, "You kind of look like James Bond. You're going to be our James Bond." And so without any real rehearsal, he was thrown into the show. He was practicing in the basement, with some dancers. And the first time he performed was the first time he made it through the whole sequence. Let me briefly describe what happens. So it starts off with Sheena Easton in a Moonraker-inspired set, singing For Your Eyes Only. And she earnestly sings the first, stanza of the song. And then it changes to that Conti music from For Your Eyes Only. And then it gets weird. And then there's, 20, 30 dancers in Moonraker-inspired suits coming and fighting. And then James Bond comes in sort of a Lotus Esprit, sort of Aston Martin. And he comes in his Moonraker jumpsuit. You see Richard Kiel, who is Jaws, obviously, and Harold Sakata, who is Odd Job. They're there. James Bond, Joseph Malone, gets out of the vehicle, starts firing his laser gun at them. There's CGI effects used for the first time in that situation in a live setting. He battles people. He stabs them with swords. He just chops. He throws Richard Kiel as Jaws into the space shuttle. It blows up. He battles more people. A few dancers come and take off of his suit, his spacesuit, revealing a tux. And then he gets into this sort of space shuttle with Sheena Easton, and it takes off. I mean, it's incredible that they did this in the Oscars, this live production, and the crowd is going wild because it's wonderful. It's honestly just wonderful. And the fact that this guy, Joseph Malone, as the dancing 007, did this on this first time with the first time he was doing it on stage, as I indicated, he had to drive for the first time this car on stage, hit the mark so it would be in the right place. So when the CGI lasers shot something, it would all line up, and there's actual explosions, and it's glorious.
I think two of my favorite things that you touched on in the book was that he and Richard Kiel rehearsed their piece in the canteen. Richard Kiel spotted him in the canteen and sort of said, let's rehearse our bit. And then the first person he met when he walked off stage, having done it, was
Roger. So he comes off stage after doing that for the first time, and he runs into Roger Moore, of all people, who's there to present Cubby Broccoli with his award. And Roger Moore gave him like a quick attaboy, a quick well done, a well done. It's available on YouTube, and it's really worth checking out. And what's sort of wonderful, and why I put it in the book is, and why it's relevant to this panel, is because, as Alan said, when people first think of James Bond, they think of the films and they think of the books. But there's this whole world of Bond where people are performing as James Bond, in all these different wonderful ways, including at the Academy Awards. They cast an actor to play James Bond, sort of with the seal of approval of Ian. It sort of makes it, even though he was the understudy, it sort of makes him an official James Bond actor. And one of the points of this panel is to look beyond the films and look beyond the novels in how we think of James Bond. He can be a part. He could be a part of so many different things, and the way he manifests is differently in each of those things.
Very true. Very true. That's a cool story. I love that story. So we will come back to the radio Bond in a minute.
Great.
So don't worry. Your research won't go to waste. But, I will say that is my absolute favorite story from the book. So either of you, the other two guys, have you heard that story before it was in Mark's book, or?
I had not heard it before, no. And it's a really fantastic book. There's interviews with so many interesting people. And I'm glad we'll talk about Radio Bond because I love the BBC productions. So great job, Mark.
And then I of course, heard about it from you, Alan, because you brought it up on our Music of Bond podcast. And I was like, that's not a real thing. And I went on YouTube and I watched it and I was like, well, all right. And it was pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome.
It is glorious. It's 1980s kitsch at its best. It's it's wonderful. And just knowing the story and watching the guy go through it and realizing that's the first time he's ever done that complete is just amazing. And didn't I read the original dancer who busted his knee never danced again or something? That was
he was injured. He was badly injured, and it sadly, and it altered the course of his career, and that's that's a shame. Addendum to that story.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to pick on Clinton now because you mentioned the foreign comic books, and obviously when I was writing the book, I did a lot of research around the foreign comic books, but I sort of stuck to the official ones. You've actually managed to find a lot of things that probably shouldn't be out there. Should we put it that way?
Yeah.
I have a very different take on James Bond. Can you sort of talk through some of the stuff that you've sort of discovered on other people's from different cultures and their take on Bond?
Sure. And I'm just going to repeat, I'm going to say this. If you want a great resource, Alan's book is a fantastic resource. It's actually what got me started on this journey of tracking all these things down. Initially, I just wanted to enjoy the artwork. So I started tracking down a lot of comics that you mentioned in your book just because I wanted to enjoy the artwork. And then I would get them and they might look like the movies, but the stories were totally different. And I found that just so fascinating. It's probably well known in America, we've had some Bond comics and fits and starts kind of come and go. Dynamite's doing comics now. In the UK, they had the Daily Express strips, which went on for a long time. And they have some great artwork by John McCluskey, Yaroslav Horak. I know you like Jim Lawrence's work as the writer a lot, Alan. They're really good stories. But when it comes to the foreign language world, there's so much out there. And I'm just going to show you a small sample. I think it was in '64 in Japan. Takao Saito was hired to make some James Bond comics based on the novels. He was actually hired by Glidrose. They got the license. These are some modern reprints you can find of his manga. They got some great artwork, but he deviated strongly from the stories. In one of the books, actually, Bond is dressed as a Roman gladiator in a Colosseum being attacked by a lion, and Mr. Big is the main villain of some of the books. So it's not Blofeld, it's Mr. Big from Live and Let Die. So that's a lot of fun. Just for fun too, if you love the spy world, Saito did a Man from U.N.C.L.E. series as 0011. So I guess he works for MI6 now. So that's a lot of fun. A lot of fans of Saito love to find these books because Saito eventually made his own series called Golgo 13, which I think is the longest running manga. So a lot of fans basically see Golgo 13 as a continuation of the wild things he was doing with Bond. Now, look at my notes, in '66, in South America, you get a lot of really interesting James Bond comics. In '66, there was an Argentine publisher called Columba, and they made some unauthorized, illegal adaptations of James Bond movies. The funny thing is, like I said, they're kind of combinations of the movies and the novels. So you might have the visuals from the movies, but the story is based on the novel. I can only assume maybe they couldn't get a copy of the movie, so they had the book, and that's what they ripped off. But they, so they're interesting from that perspective, but I think they suffer from comic adaptation problems, which is that they're both overwritten and too short at the same time, which happens all the time. I think the best South American comics, and I think you agree, Alan, are the ones by a publishing house called Zigzag. This is a print of one of the covers. So they got some beautiful artwork on the covers. And the guy who mainly did these is a guy named German Gabler, very nice man. I think you've spoken with him, Mark, I think, as well.
Yeah.
But he actually referred, I think you even say in your book, Alan, didn't he get the job because he could actually speak, he could actually read English? And so he read
basically.
Yeah, so because he could read Fleming's novels. And his comics, the ones that adapt Fleming, are really pretty novelistic in many ways. They have a full run in 59 issues, so there's a lot for collectors out there. But Gabler was interesting because also, when he adapted Casino Royale, for a few issues before, he introduced Le Chiffre as kind of an overarching villain for a while. So he managed to kind of build things up. You know, there were other stuff. I think there was a publisher named Chilasor who made some movie adaptations. Here's a kind of a widescreen Goldfinger adaptation that you can see, which is pretty interesting. But the other big publisher of Bond comics is a Scandinavian press called Samik. Here's a couple of some color editions of theirs. So some really nice cover artwork. The stories, though, are all over the place. I know Alan's going to love this one. Here is James Bond and the Millennium Falcon up there. So the Samik comics, some of them, I think you say in your book too, Alan, some of them are in that gritty Fleming vein, and some of them are sci-fi, some of them are parodies. So they're kind of all over the place, but there's 42 original issues out there. So if you're a collector, there's a lot of stuff. And just to cap off a couple more things, there's so much all over the world. I got this. This is an Italian erotica James Bond comic. It adapts The Spy Who Loved Me, actually adapts the novel by Fleming, which no one's ever really adapted. Of course, they make it a bit more adult, you know, but it's actually pretty faithful adaptation. And in China, I can't tell you how thin these things are. They are so cheaply made. These are called manhwa, which is the Chinese equivalent of comics. Artwork is pretty rough, but I do like how they start off with a gun barrel sequence. So just like the movies. And I know you all get a kick out of this. Here is one, and look who the guest star is. We have Dirty Harry himself, Clint Eastwood is the guest star. And the last thing I'll show you is also from China. I managed to track these down. These are clearly illegally made. These are known as Linwanhua. These are little pocket-sized books. Some of the artwork is actually nice. Like, this is a really nice image of the guy getting shot from the billboard in From Russia with Love. I think it's pretty well drawn. Others, not so much. You know, here is James Bond himself. So not to pick on the artist, but clearly not the best rendition of our favorite secret agent. But there's so much out there as a collector. It's really kind of amazing. So I don't want to keep rambling. I'll just say it's amazing how popular Bond is all over the world. How so many cultures have appropriated Bond and done their own thing with it, and it's just really fun as a collector. You know, there's, like Alan said, there's 25 movies. You know, there's there are the books, but there's so much more out there. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I think when I did the book and we stopped the book at 1995, I think I counted there was 240 something original Bond stories in comics, and that was before some of the ones that you found since then and Dynamite. So we're probably, you know, upwards of 300 original James Bond stories told in comics, which is actually the most original in any given media is in comics. Yeah, those little Linwan, I've got a couple of those Chinese bootlegs. it took me ages to actually figure out which story they were adapting from some of them, because they're
Yeah.
so
Yeah, and then that's actually, I haven't tackled those on my site yet because I just do not, I can't understand Chinese just looking at, I can understand Spanish and French, you know, I can't read it more than I can speak it, but I don't know what I'm doing with Chinese. So I need to make some more international friends. So if any of you are out there, feel free to contact me.
Very cool. Very cool.
Oh, Alan,
Oh, yeah, sorry. And Mark, doing the research for your book, you mentioned that you'd spoken to Jermaine Gabler, but did you sort of delve into any of these foreign iterations of Bond?
Yeah, not for Many Lives of James Bond. For Many Lives of James Bond, I spoke to Mike Grell, who did that incredible 3-book mini
Permission to Die. Yeah.
Which is incredible. And Permission to Die is one of the great Bond titles that waiting to be turned into a movie. For something that might come out in November.
Okay, didn't mean to put you on the spot.
There's a lot about Bond comics, including the zigzag. You know, it's so we as an English speaker, I realized what a bias I had, because I only consider comics that are my first language. And when I think about Bond comics, I think about the Daily Express, I think about Dynamite, I think about, the 80s run, which were all interesting, but, not until there's a connection. You started this research, Alan, and then Clinton built on it. And I would have had no idea if it wasn't for both of your work. And there are, as Clinton was saying, and he does an incredible job of just translating these stories and making on his website, Comics Royale, and making so that you become immersed in the story. And there's 59 stories. And so for the next book, I'm told that there might be a major analysis of German Gabler and an interview, as well as some other lost Bond comic. Yeah, cool. But there's this whole world about, what's also great about these Bond comics is that they're not like the books and they're not like the movies. Some of them are faithful and some of them are serious, but some of them are just absurd. Some of them don't really make sense, and I know and therefore dismissed. But there's so many different tones and textures to Bond stories, and even the weird ones, even with the Millennium Falcon, even with the absurd, there is great value and enjoyment from them.
There is, definitely, yeah. And I'm really grateful for Clinton to actually publicly show the Millennium Falcon page, because whenever I mention that at conventions, people just reckon I'm making it up. So. It's on public record now. Thank you, Clinton. So,
no, it was my pleasure.
So, Jared, what's your sort of exposure been to in Bonding comics? Other than Goofy, which we were talking about earlier.
Other than Goofy, clearly. I'm kind of like Mark. I was sort of English focused on Bond comics, and I had all the little adaptations. I loved the Marvel super specials from the 80s, the magazine sized ones. I'm a big fan of the Fear Eyes Only and Octopussy, and I think those are the only two they ever did. But it was your book, Alan, that exposed me to the broader world. And then I got the chance on Her Majesty's Secret podcast to interview Clinton and the Comics Royale. So just like Mark said, it just kind of, Alan led to Clinton led to, what the hell, man, this is a giant world. And I just adore it. And maybe it's because I come at it from the angle of an artist, but I don't care if the stories make sense or not. I just want to see graphically how they're doing it. And then, where else are you going to find James Bond in the Millennium Falcon? Come on. So yeah, I'm pretty much just echoing what Mark said, but what an amazing and fascinating world. So thanks to both Alan and Clinton for getting us there.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the Dynamite draw exclusively from Ian Fleming's novels. There, every once in a while there'll be some reference to the movies, some sort of sly reference, but they are exclusively focused on adapting Ian Fleming's character. But in the 80s, there was more. It was a little bit of more of a mashup. The Mike Grell book what, his touch point was Ian Fleming, but then, you see that montage from the films, and, or
Serpent's Tooth.
Serpent's Tooth is a Roger Moore 80s Bond action film. And Dynamite and Ian Fleming are successful, in my opinion, at narrowing their focus and just making it like, this is what we're trying to do with Ian Fleming's character.
Yeah.
But I think that's the interesting thing about James Bond is that we as fans over the decades have accepted different iterations. We've accepted not just different looks, but we've accepted the more campy style. We've accepted the more gritty style, the more novelistic. A lot of people like the novels and the films. They're very different from one another. But it's kind of funny. It's kind of like Batman in a way. We have Adam West, we have Michael Keaton, we have Ben Affleck. We have so many different Batmans that are all totally different, but they've been kind of accepted. I think it's amazing about Bond.
Yeah, I put Mark on the spot earlier, and I want to put Jared on the spot a little now. As a comic book artist, and I've seen you draw Bond or draw Bond-like characters, Jared. How do you approach capturing a character like Bond on the page?
Oof. The one and main thing that I'm thinking when I want to capture Bond on the page is style. He has to look stylish, and the eyes. If you get the eyes right and the style right, it's almost like nothing else matters. As long as when I say style, he doesn't even necessarily need to be in a tuxedo. I'm currently, I feel like I'm playing the role of Mark now. I'm currently working on a project that may or may not come out next year. And then in our project, our James Bond ripoff character, he's never seen in a tux. But I told my artist, because I'm actually the writer on that one, I told my artist, I was like, he just has to look better than everybody else around him at all times. No matter what he's wearing. If he's in a torn shirt, if he's in a shirt and a tie, if he's in a polo shirt, he just has to look better than everybody else around him. So that's what I mean when I say style. And then when I say eyes, I know there's been a lot of different actors that have played Bond, and they all have sort of different eyes. But when you think James Bond and eyes, I know Alan's doing it right. It's got to be Timothy Dalton. He's got the perfect eyes. They're the eyes of a gentleman, but they're also, if you look deep into him, it's the eyes of somebody who they'll slit someone's throat in the back alley if they have to, And I think those are the two key things that I think about when I draw the character.
Cool. I've never asked you that before, and it's very interesting. all the work we've done together, and we've never actually had that conversation.
That was a fresh one.
That was cool.
I think you're right about that, Jared. I remember that time you see Dalton in The Living Daylights when he shows up, and I think it's Saunders says to him that he's late. There's just that glare in Dalton's eyes. He has wolf eyes.
Wolf's eyes, man.
He really does. I think you're right.
Yeah, for me, actually, it's in that scene where actually Saunders gets killed and he bursts the balloon, and then Cara says, "Are you okay?" And it's like bad accident back there, and it's just that the look in the eyes there.
Look in the eyes.
So, Jared, it's your turn. So, we've talked about comics. We've talked about dancing Bonds. And you talked about projects going on. I know one project you've actually already started and put the first episode out there, which is a history of James Bond in video games, which you're doing a dedicated podcast series for. Do you want to give us a little bit of background on the history of Bond in video games and the story behind that, and sort of how really that's brought a lot of new fans to the franchise?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know how long we have, but just cut me off when I need to stop. Okay. So I've been a huge gamer my whole life. I was born in 76. So the video game boom happens around 82. I'm 6 years old. That's when I first see my first Atari. Long story short, I've grown up gaming. I game to this day. And when you're that kind of fan and you're a James Bond fan, obviously you look for the two things. So yes, the first volume, or as I call it, disc one, of my documentary on James Bond and video games. It's a podcast documentary. It's available at on Her Majesty's Secret Podcast. And volume one is the 80s. And then I'm almost done. And volume two will be coming out very soon, which is the 90s, 2000s, 2010 and beyond, as the four volumes. So where to begin? I'll tell you what, I'll just hit you with the fun highlights. It all starts technically in 1982. There's a little, back when computer games were on cassettes, like the audio cassettes that you would be more familiar with. There's a game called Shaken But Not Stirred. It's made by Richard Spencer. It's available pretty much exclusively in England for a video game system called the ZX Spectrum. That was like England's original sort of widespread computer game system. And it's not licensed. So, you know, a lot of people say it's not the first official game, but I like to point out too that this is 82, that like the understanding of licensing and how that works for computer games, it's all so gray and muddled that you know, so don't look down your nose at Richard Spencer. He wasn't a pirate or anything. It was early in this whole thing. But here's some things I think are fascinating that, moving forward from there. In 83, you get your first official game, which is for the Atari, and it's by a guy named Joe Goucher, programs James Bond 007, which is a simple vehicle game. Comes out in 83, which I find fascinating because 1983 was the first time that James Bond himself plays a video game. It's like video games, art imitates life, imitates art that's life in a movie. Anyway, my head hurts. But anyway, James Bond, Sean Connery plays a video game in an arcade scene in 1983 in Never Say Never Again when the first licensed 007 game comes out for the Atari. There was some reason that Atari even advertised an Octopussy game to sync up with the 1983 release of Octopussy. There's advertising you can go see of it. Never came out. I don't know what happened, if they abandoned the project. I intend to dig a little deeper because as I finish this audio documentary, I'm considering trying to be cool like Mark and Alan and turn this whole thing into a book. I'd love to find out what happened there, and I'll look into that. So that's your very early stages, Atari, and then from there, it pretty much goes into a company called Domark. Domark is a small British game company that gets the license for James Bond starting in 85 with A View to a Kill, and they hold that license for about 8 years or so. They are the licensed folks. The only other people making Bond games during that time is the interactive fiction games. Okay, those are the ones where you actually read, and then you read the story, you type in your command, and you hope it's right so that you can move on in the story. And what's fascinating about those is you get 2 of those, 85 and 86. You get, because it was 85, you get A View to a Kill, and then 86, they come out with Goldfinger. And everybody, I bet everybody on this panel knows who wrote them. But Raymond Benson wrote those computer games, the first American author of the James Bond series. And so I think that's just fascinating that he starts in the world of games. And so with Domark, they're syncing up games with Bond movies. They have a nice cozy relationship with Eon as they're releasing games along with the movies that are coming out, you know, Living Daylights, License to Kill, all that stuff. They sync up nicely. After that, licensing gets wild again as the bigger console booms happen. You get Nintendo, Sega Genesis, you know, that sort of big boom in the late 80s. And then so licensing starts moving around. So it's kind of like it kind of comes in weird blocks. It kind of comes with like Domark in the 80s. It kind of gets weird in the early 90s, but by the later 90s, it gets encapsulated by EA. Electronic Arts gets it. But in between there in the 90s, there's just a whole bunch of really great games, to include a James Bond game on the Game Boy that plays much like The Legend of Zelda that a lot of people aren't familiar with. And of course, 1997, GoldenEye. Okay, GoldenEye blows the lid off of everything. I mean, if anybody out there's ever played a James Bond video game, it's GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64. Exclusive to the Nintendo 64, made by Rare. The game was so powerful that it actually grew the James Bond community in general because it drew gamers in. The game was so good, the gamers who didn't really care about James Bond or weren't involved in it, they started saying, this game is so good. Oh, it's based on this movie called GoldenEye, and what a 1-2 punch, right? If you're going to introduce somebody new to the James Bond franchise, that ain't a bad place to start, fellas. Not a bad place at all. So that's what Alan was alluding to when he introduced this, and I started my long-winded story, is that just grew the fandom. And like I said, from there, EA starts doing them. They started a thing that that's kind of been continued, because once EA has it, then Activision picks it up. But they start going back and they make From Russia with Love, okay, with Sean Connery. And here's another fun bit of trivia for you. Not 1, not 2, but 3 James Bond actors' final official James Bond appearances are in video games. Sean Connery's last appearance is in the From Russia with Love video game that EA put out in the early 2000s. Pierce Brosnan's last official appearance was in oh, what's the title of it? It'll come to me. Everything or Nothing, where he does the actual voice work for James Bond in that game, along with Judi Dench and Willem Dafoe. It's like got A-list voice talent in it. And Timothy Dalton's last appearance as James Bond is on the cover art for the Sega Genesis game, The Duel. So it's kind of fascinating how the last appearances of these actors officially, getting an actual signed paycheck to be James Bond is in the video game world. And so, yeah, it moves forward. They do Quantum of Solace, the Daniel Craig era. One of the more recent ones is a fascinating game called 007 Legends. When I say recent, I want to say that might have been more like 2010-ish. But it's a fascinating concept because it starts out as Skyfall, and it's Daniel Craig, and he gets shot, off the top of the train. And then as he's falling, he starts having these memories of things he's done in the past. So then you play through Goldfinger, and you play through On Her Majesty's Secret Service. You play through Die Another Day and License to Kill, all as Daniel Craig, James Bond, which I was like, this is brilliant and fascinating. What a fun thing to do. Unfortunately, the game wasn't super successful, and it kind of marked the most recent death point of Bond in video games, and we're sort of waiting ever since then. But man, it is a long and storied history. When I started doing the documentary, I would have guessed that there was maybe 20 games, and I think there's over 40 something games now. And oh my gosh, wait till I get into the world of modding. Talking about GoldenEye on the N64. Did you know there's Goldfinger N64? That the modding community has just made a full game. There's The Spy Who Loved Me on Nintendo 64. It's insane. So there's so much to know. Like I said, I could just keep on talking about it. I want to hit those high points. I think it's fascinating that a lot of Bond actors' last appearances in games. I think it's neat how Bond in video games showed up when Bond played video games and never say never again. And I mean, we could do a whole round table on N64, GoldenEye, and how it affected things. But there's sort of a brief encapsulation of what you'll be hearing as my documentary moves forth. My favorite thing about the documentary itself is, I do talk to a couple of creators like Raymond Benson here and there. I'm really focused on the players and finding players who played these games in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, just listening to hear them tell their experience. That's really the hook of my documentary. So if anybody out there is interested in checking out Volume 1, like I said, it is on the On Her Majesty's Secret podcast feed, and I would hope you would enjoy it. So, who's got questions?
Jared, hey, Jared, I got to tell you, I played GoldenEye when I was a kid, and I was furious because I loved the game, and one of the video game magazines that would publish cheat codes and extra little levels, all the information, they put out an April Fool's joke that if you played the game just right, you could unlock all the different actors who played Bond. And I actually believed it. And I tried like hell for a month to do it. And then the next issue came out a month later, and they said that was our April Fool's joke. This is, of course, before the internet was all over the place. But yeah, I was completely ignorant of that. But it did open the world up. It made me want to know more about these other actors, because GoldenEye was the first Bond I ever saw. But yeah, that I'll never forget that. Never.
Oh, thanks for sharing that with me. I'd not heard that. So that's another fun nugget I could run down, and that's fascinating. Awesome.
Yeah, I'll try to find it online and send it to you.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I was just going to pay Jared a compliment here, so he might as well take this one to the bank, because I'm not a gamer. I really just don't do gaming at all, and I'm actually absolutely fascinated by what he's uncovered about the history of the video games, and highly recommend at least the first disc of his documentary. I found it fascinating, and I'm not a gamer too, but just from a James Bond and a historical context too, I thought it was really good work. Sorry, Mark, didn't mean to speak over you.
No, a couple of things. One, the Bond video games are so important to the franchise, and Ian has often put their resources really behind it. Bruce Fierstein, the screenwriter, wrote a bunch of the video games. He adapted From Russia with Love. I interviewed him a little bit about this in the book, and he just talked about putting the baddie, the From Russia with Love, the video game ends differently than From Russia with Love, the film. In the film, like there's this giant battle at the end that's more like Moonraker, Spy Who Loved Me kind of battle, and Bond squares off with Red Grant, and they moved him to the end, even though it broke the story in this otherwise pretty faithful adaptation, just because they wanted, you know, the big bad fight to be at the end. But what I love about the For Marcia with Love video game is that it's sort of like a James Bond animated film. If you cut away all the gameplay and just watch the clips, you're watching James Bond, the animated movie, voiced by Sean Connery and written by, you know, an official Bond screenwriter. And then, if I may, just one or two quick stories about Sean Connery's recording of it.
I know where this is going.
I interviewed the producer and of it, and he told two fabulous stories. He asked Sean Connery, why did you do this? Why did you do the video game? It can't just be the money, even though they're very well paid. Why would you bother? Why would you return to this character? And he said, my grandchildren are gamers. I'm doing it for them. And if that is not the sweetest Sean Connery story you've ever heard, this second one it's neck and neck. So he only recorded that game over a course of a couple of days, 2-3 days. It wasn't a week, it wasn't a 2 week. And at the end of the day, the producer's name is Glenn Schofield. Incidentally, and every time Sean Connery said his name, Schofield, it always sounded like Blowfield, and it always gave him a little pleasure. But anyway, so they good day, well done. Sean Connery goes home. The producer goes back to his hotel. The producer gets a call from the engineer. I don't got it. What do you mean? I don't have the recording. It's lost. And so the producer says, "What you lost the recording?" And he said, "In my 30 years of doing this, it's never happened." And the producer said, "I don't have enough money to pay Sean Connery to come back and record all of his lines again." And the audio engineer goes, "I know Sean Connery. Let me give him a call." The next day, Connery comes back, does the whole thing again for free. Now, I think that's also such a sweet story, because I know that the Connery's relationship to Bond is very, very complicated. I know the producer's relationship to Connery is equally complicated. But both of those stories just, to me, showed this sort of lovely human element. And here was this engineer that Connery had worked with in the Bahamas, for the last 25, 30 years. And he didn't want that guy to get in trouble. He didn't want the producer who he bonded with. So he just said, "I'm going to come in and I'll do it for the day." And I think that's so lovely.
Awesome. Yes.
That's an awesome story. Yes. Thank you. So we did promise that we'd come back to Bond on the Radio, Mark. So we have about 20 minutes, actually probably 15 minutes, because there's a couple of questions we want to talk about that have come in from folks who are the attendees. So if you want to sort of give us a précis of Bond on the Radio, that would be great.
I'd love to. So there's 3 stages of Bond on the radio. But before we get to those 3 quick stages, let me just provide some context. Casino Royale, and I'm terrible with dates, so if I'm off by a year, please forgive me. Casino Royale, the novel, came out in 1953. Barry Nelson played James Bond, Jimmy Bond, on Climax in 1954. And the Daily Express started in about 1958. So all these big Bond events happened before Dr. No. While we think of the launch point for Bond as the films, which, obviously that made it a global phenomenon, there's all this Bond stuff going on before the films. And the first thing was, there was always this Bond myth about this lost radio production of Moonraker. People kept on saying that the first time Bond was on radio was in Moonraker in the 50s, maybe 56, maybe 57, maybe 58, maybe 59. We don't know. There's no recording of it, but this is what we know. We know that Bob Holness played James Bond in Moonraker in South Africa in the 50s in a live recording, which has never been found. That's like a really exciting, to me, bit of Bond trivia, and it never made any sense to me. All of those things together Why is there a live radio show in Africa, in South Africa, with this English actor? Nobody has any proof of it. And so I was sort of a little obsessed with just, all I wanted to do was find the date of when it took place. I wanted to make it real to me so I could understand it. And so I just started, searching, the internet like crazy. And on some of the Bond forums, there were some references to this guy who writes this Bondologist blog called the Bondologist blog. His name is Brian. And he said that his handle was Silhouette Man. And he said he wrote Bob Holness, the actor who played James Bond. And he got some answers back. So I contacted Brian at the Bondologist blog, guy I've never met before. Said, I'm writing this book, Many Lives of James Bond. I'm trying to get into all the actors. Can you help me? And he sent me his letter where Bob Holness answers all the questions you would want to know. How did you get to play James Bond? What is this production? And I'll briefly, Bob Holness was born in South Africa in Durban. He moved to England. And then when he moved back, he joined this radio program for the SABC, South African Broadcasting Company, where they did weekly shows, soap operas, all these things. And so there was and one of the things that they happened to do was Moonraker. But he told Brian, and Brian let me, guy I'd never met, just met through the internet, let me publish the entire letter, which is in the book. I'm mentioning that because I think that's so sweet that this Bond community is out there trying to help people. But it didn't, one of the things he said is, I'm sorry, I can't be more help. I have no idea when the thing was recorded. I think, it was in the 50s. And so I contacted his daughter, Bob Holness's daughter, who was in a group who sang I Eat Cannibals. And so I finally tracked her down, and this thing takes years. I'm condensing years of crazy research. And she said that she just found she was going through her father's study and found the contract that he signed to play James Bond, which is so cool. And she let me publish it. And what made me so happy is that this thing made it real. Like, it really, to me, it's like, does it really exist, some Bond program? And it did. Here's the contract. Can you see it? That he signed to play James Bond. And so one of the exciting bits is it includes the rehearsal times that he had to do it. He had to do 2 rehearsals. It says that the performance was 90 minutes, and he was paid £11, which is $325, something like that in today's money. Not a lot. And then the most exciting part is that it took place January 30th, 1958. That's the actual date that this thing took place. Very exciting. And he does confirm that it was recorded live and no tape is thought, there is no recording that is thought to exist. I know that there's a lot of rumors about there, but I could relatively confidently say that it doesn't exist. It's been lost to time. But for me, this contract helps ground it. So that's stage 1 of Bond on radio. There's 2 more, they're much faster. Then in 1990, Michael Jaston played Bond in You Only Live Twice in a roughly 90-minute recording for the BBC. There's Blofeld in it, Burt Kwok from the Pink Panther movies. He's in it as Ando. And I asked Michael Jaston, who I interviewed for the book, how did you get cast? All those questions, tell me about the character and the mindset. And, he didn't have to audition to play James Bond in You Only Live Twice in 1990. They just cast him. He was later considered by Broccoli and Eon to be a replacement for James Bond. He came in and met with them, and it's a good radio program. Someone has, you can find it on YouTube. But what's nice about it is in his approach to it, Michael Jason said he was trying to be relaxed because Bond's in charge. So he can be relaxed because he's always in charge. And the nice thing about the medium of radio is that by virtue, you get inside the character's head. You understand his thought process. You hear Michael Jason speaking Soto to, the audience, really expressing his inner thoughts. So it's very, very exciting. And it starts with Bond with all the zip going out of his life because of, what happened with Tracy, and ends with him reinvigorated, having looked death in the face. But it's also a very strange one-off. Oh, and there was thought of doing the next one in the story, but that never materialized. And it's a very strange one-off because it's the middle story of the Blofeld or the Spectre trilogy, where you miss part one, where Bond meets and marries and is widowed in Her Majesty's Secret Service, and they don't do part three, where Bond gets his revenge. So you've got this middle story, this really well done middle story, but a middle story with Bond going off to, find out his identity. But so it's a little strange. You're only reading part two of a story, but if you could put that aside, and you should, because everyone listening to this knows part one and three, it's really well done. And then the final thing, Sorry. And then the final thing is, if you were to say who's played James Bond the most, you'd get into an argument about Roger Moore or Sean Connery, or does the unofficial one. I don't think you should, as an aside, you shouldn't call them unofficial Bond movies. You should call them non-Eon movies. They were officially made by the people who held the license at the time. They were legally made. You might not like them. That's, Casino Royale is official. It's not, lots of people hate it, but it's official. Sorry. Anyway, who's played James Bond the most? Is Roger Moore, Sean Connery? No, it's Toby Stevens, who played Gustav Graves in Die Another Day. And he played Bond 9 times on these radio programs. The first of which was Dr. No, and it was created for the centenary of Ian Fleming in 2008. And it was intended to be a one-off, but it was so successful that they did 8 more up until last year. And they've got great actors. They have Ian McKellen as Goldfinger, Tom Conti, and Alfred Molino as Blofeld and Largo. They have Joanna Lumley from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and they had Rosamund Pike from Die Another Day playing Pussy Galore. So they've got these heavyweight actors, some of them who have Bond connections, some of whom don't. And they're 90 minutes of really well-produced, faithful adaptations of Ian Fleming stories. They manifest those adaptations differently than the books. They're not recreating scene for scene, but they're hitting all the major story points. And they're idiosyncratic, and they're funny, and they're well done. That's my spiel.
Thank you. That's great. A great overview. I love the fact that you actually nailed the Bob Holness thing, because that's been going around for years as to whether that was actually even a real thing or not. So
yeah, that's my one little most important thing that I will have ever done for the Bond community in my head is put some shape to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even as recently, like a couple of weeks before your book came out, and I put something on my Twitter feed about it, and I got an immediate thing from some Bond scholar like, "Are you sure that's even real?" I'm like, oh, okay. So, okay. So that closed that argument down. So I appreciate that. So. All right. I actually want to go back to something that that Clinton touched on earlier. We've got about 7 minutes left, and I just want to spend a couple of minutes. You're just talking about, Clinton, you mentioned earlier about Bond's global appeal and the fact that so many cultures can adapt Bond and adopt Bond. From each of you, what do you think it is about Bond that makes him such an adaptable character that works across so many different cultures? Because he is quintessentially an English hero, but what is it about him that makes him resonate with so many different cultures? And as the token Englishman, I'll shut up and let you three answer that one.
I think for me, and I've talked to Mark about this, I think for me, it's that you kind of get the best of both worlds with Bond. Bond is both trashy pulp and high class at the same time. You get that with Ian Fleming's novels, which are well written, but they kind of are like Raymond Chandler novels too. They're very pulpy, they're very dark and gritty. The movies, I think you get the thrills, but there's also the exotic, the high class. So I think that you get that best of both worlds. I think that we as human beings admire people who are of action, you know, men and women of action, but we also admire intellect. I think you get that with Bond. That's kind of just my answer right there.
Cool. Jared, what's your thoughts?
I'll exactly what Clinton said, and the only thing I'll add is one of the great debatable frustrations in the Bond community is, you know, in more recent films, they try to give Bond more of a backstory. You know, here's his brother and how they grew up and all that stuff. I think what made Bond work for so long is the lack of backstory. He was such a blank slate character, but a comfortable character that we knew all the little details, but beyond all the little details, there was nothing. You know, that was his job. You know, with a character like Batman, you have to explain why a man puts on a cape and a cowl and goes out at night dressed up. With Batman, with James Bond, it's on his tax forms. Government employee. This is what I do. You know, it requires no backstory, and I think that helped with the mass appeal of it, because it's like anyone could be like, well, heck, I could maybe be James Bond. I don't know. You know, there's not a complicated backstory there. So what Clinton said, plus that.
Mark, have you got anything to add to that?
No, I mean, Fleming thought, you know, he made him a silhouette character, and so we the audience are able to project so much of our own wishes and goals and, you know, onto him that we fill in the blanks in a way that sometimes the artist doesn't have to, and he's just so malleable that, you know, you see all these different media that he could fit into successfully. It's incredible.
Yeah, I've always thought of Bond as a plot device and not a character. And I know I just actually read The Man with the Golden Typewriter, which is a collection of Fleming's letters, an excellent book, but he talks in there about the fact that he just sees Bond as a professional who does his job well. And that's the end of his description of Bond. So I think you're right that we can, as Jared said, project, and you said project ourselves sort of into the character. I think that really adds to the appeal.
You know what you said about Bond being professional. That's one of the fun things in Fleming's novels too, is you might spend a whole chapter with Bond reading a file.
Right,
and so it's almost kind of like you get to be Bond for a chapter or two. And you don't see that in the movies, where in the movies he knows everything automatically. So yeah, they are different worlds, but it's amazing how Bond is fit into all these different worlds and mediums so well.
Cool. So we have a couple of minutes left. We had one question from the audience about whether we think there's any chance of any of the unfinished official Bond comics being sort of completed and reprinted in any form. Any sort of thoughts on that? Mark's shaking his head.
I think. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Mark. I'm sorry.
No, Clinton, you do it. Do it.
I think it would have happened by now if it was going to happen. I would love it if they did. You know, I would love it if someone would actually professionally print a lot of these Samiq and Zigzag comics. I would love to see that. You know, I enjoy translating, but it takes me a long time. I would love it if it was professionally done. Whenever I do it, I don't have access to the original artwork at all. I'm not able to actually swap out the word balloons at all, like a professional company would be able to do that. I think if it was going to happen, it would have happened by now. Sad to say, but at least there are more Bond comics being made, and I hope that continues to go on.
Cool. I totally agree. Yeah.
I gotta tell you, when I think of unfinished Bond comics, of course, I think of GoldenEye, and then the Simon Jowett one. Was that Armageddon that went unfinished? He did two. I think it was Armageddon.
It was a silent Armageddon.
Silent Armageddon. Yeah, it did too. And what I would really love to see is a company like Dynamite pay a writer like Alan and an artist like Jared to finish those. That's all I say.
I would donate to that Kickstarter.
All right, guys, we're on the final minute. So a quick round the horn. Where can folks find you online? Mark, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'm on Mark Edlitz at Twitter, markedlitz.com for my website. My book, The Many Lives of James Bond, is at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Please get a copy. And more to come. And thank you very much for having me on this. I'm very happy to be here with all of you.
Thanks, Mark. Jared?
I'm at Yard Sale Artist, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Parlor, YouTube. It's all Yard Sale Artist. Come find me there. You can check out theyardsaleartist.com if you want to see some of my artwork. And if you want to hear me running my mouth about James Bond, it's on Her Majesty's Secret Podcast. And if you want to hear me running my mouth about comic books and TV and movies and stuff, check out the Long Box Crusade.
And Clinton?
You can find me at comicsroyale.com. I got to thank my friend Chris for that pun. I did not come up with that name. That was all him. But you can find me at comicsroyale.com, and you can email me there too if you'd like to talk. I love meeting new fans. So thank you very much, Alan.
My pleasure. And you can find me for Bond-related stuff on Twitter at BondLexicon, and the updated website, jamesbondlexicon.online, and the James Bond, The History of the Illustrated 007 is available through your favorite bookseller pretty much everywhere. So thank you, guys. It's been a great conversation. I really appreciate you joining us, and thanks to everybody who attended or anybody who's watching later on, and just enjoy your James Bond. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're good. Thanks, guys.